Hello, world. I am Farsight, and this is Kerbal Space Program with the RP1 and KOS modifications installed so that we can run a more complete space program and automate it more like the way real spacecraft are automated. We've gotten to a kind of a plateau in our playthrough here. You may have noticed that there's a kind of a delay between the uploading of the last episode and this one, as I have been messing around with designs and ideas and trying to work out how to perhaps use existing technologies to get us to that 3,000 kilometer downrange line without success on that latter. Anyway, let's open up our save here. We have just finished recruiting our 100 researchers. You'll notice that we are very low on funds. But that's okay, we're still cash flow positive on our budget. We have a bunch of research stacked up, and we are currently working on reconditioning the launch complex and building another D4. There's a problem. My original idea was that the D4 that I'm building would be to satisfy this contract, downrange distance launch vehicle development, which is 240 kilometers downrange with 500 units of sounding payload. And I was messing around with the designs, and I realized the D4, as built, has a camera and does not have the 500 liters of sounding rocket payload. So I'm going to go into integration. I'm going to cancel integrating this D4. We're only 0.02% in. So we are going to scrap it and get back our 1,376 funds. The other thing is, I was looking at the upcoming sounding rocket contracts. We've got basically hitting 130 and 180 kilometer altitude with 75 liters of payload. Again, we don't actually have a sounding rocket that does that. Our S4 rocket only has 35 payload, and our S3 rocket, which has 75, can only hit 155. So that's going to require the solid rocket engines at a minimum. I thought, the early rocketry. I thought the early rocketry would get me a better engine, and it does. And I looked ahead and I thought, oh, we can do the next rocket boosters, and those are nice. That it gets us a Nike, which is way overpowered for us, but is really slick. And later on, we'll do the early materials science. Well, early materials science gets us the aluminum stringers, which is a much improved fuel tank. I want to do that before the solid rocket engines. And that may seem weird because this one is going to take 351 days. We could knock out these engines in 90 days. This means we're getting our early material science done 90 days sooner, which may be important because our downrange rockets are the ones that are really the clincher for us right here, the problem. We need to get this done by 57. And yeah, we're still very early on, but there may be challenges in getting 3,000 and then 5,000 kilometers downrange. So I'm going to get the early materials science out first. So we'll be, if I do everything I want to do in this episode, we're going to be designing and flying 2 rockets. And the second rocket will require a better engine than we have. The first rocket is just a straight up upgrade of our D4. And I'm going to do that on camera because ain't got time to do prep work, right? Here's the D4. And if I open this out, you'll see that we have our avionics in this nice little silver cylinder. And we have our camera, and we have a biological experiment. There's no payload here. So close this back up. We're going to be watching the engineer's report as we do this. I will probably need to do some adjustments to the launch complex. I don't know yet. So this is going to be called D5. This can be deliver an early camera, bio experiment, and 500 units of sounding rocket payload. I don't know what the 500 units of sounding rocket payload is. It's probably just a dummy load, as we're working on this program to launch other things into space. So we're working on our launch vehicles right now. That's D5. That's its kind of statement of purpose. And I'm going to open up the fairings. And we're going to put our little payload in right here below the camera. Fuel tanks. We want a procedural tank, conventional structure. Just right there. Notice how the fairings are going to start adjusting automatically as we go. For reference, our avionics is a diameter of 1.4. So we're going to bring in our conventional tank. Set it to 1.4. Like that. Now, it needs to be a high-pressure tank. We're going to use the high-pressure aluminum. And we're going to tell it that we are going to fill this with sounding payload. Notice down at the bottom here, excuse me, it's got 865 sounding payload. This is more than we need. Utilization was 75%. As you change the fuel in the tank type, if you go through a tank type that has a smaller maximum utilization, it'll bump it down. So we're going to bump that all the way back up. And now we're going to start lowering the length until our amount of SO down at the very bottom is 500. So 400 gives us 517. So multiply 517.2 by 400 millimeters. No, wait a minute. Wrong way around, Greg. Multiply. 500 is what we want. Divide 517.2 by 400. There we go. So it should be I'm sorry. I'm not good at working word problems in the evenings. So 400 divided by 500 divided by 400 times 500 divided by 517 gives us 386.69. So we're going to set our length 0.387. And that gives us our 500 units of sounding payload with absolute minimum overhead. Stick that back on top and close our fairings. And there is the D5 rocket. And for bookkeeping, I'm going to note that this has 2,826 meters per second of delta V. The D4 had 2,993, so we've significantly cut our total delta V for the rocket by adding this rather large payload. This does have biological experiment and a film camera and 500 units of payload. Okay, so I am not going to show the simulation of this, so we are going to pause for a moment. I'll be back after I've simulated with the bug report. Okay, first problem is that I have done some reorganization of the Farcos code. I had a problem where I had pulled in Farcos, I started a new branch, and then just kind of moved home off the way and started putting a new home in for the RP1 stuff, not thinking that would mean we could never have the RP1 code and the unmodified code co-resident. So I did some work in the background. I moved all the RP1 home directories for all of my ships out to /RP1 instead of /home and merged it back into main. But this does mean that I need to go into the older ship designs. I'm going to fly them again, go back into the avionics, go back into KOS, and make sure that I've identified the boot file saying this is an RP1 launch. So that will adjust my search paths inside Farco so it'll pick up the avionics for D5 from the proper place. And we can close that up. It also means that D4 as it stands would not have run anyway because it used the old boot file, which is, when you build the ship, contents of the boot file is actually copied into the ROM inside KOS. So it's baked into the design of the ship, from what I understand. The upshot of that is that we ended up with a design being built in the launch complex that I could not change, which would have tried to find its source code in the wrong place. This should find it in the right place. And now I'm going to go pause the recording and go simulate again. Okay, simulation complete. I really didn't have anything to tweak. It just kind of worked. And we've got some really decent margins on it, which means that this D5 may be able to do contracts following this. We have the intermediate and difficult contracts available to us. I am not sure what the benefit might be if we do the difficult one first. Do we keep doing the difficult one, or do they ratchet up? Anyway, we simulated using difficult, so I'm going to go ahead and apply the difficult contract. So to get there from here, let's follow our normal procedure. We need to make sure that this is properly tooled. Go. RP1. So we have some things that are of new sizes, so we're going to tool everything up. Unfortunately, that was covered by our credits because we don't have very much funds. That's all tooled. We look at our engineer's report, it looks like it will fit in the current launch complex, so it's 14.3 tons, we can go to 15. It's 14.8 meters tall, we can go to 20, so we're good. So now I can repeat one, have the plans. I want D5 to be on our list of plans. We're not going to make any more D4s. We're going to make a D5, that. And now I'm going to poke the D5 button, spend 1,397 funds, add D5 to our integration list. We see here that this rocket will be ready to fly in December of 1952. That's shortly after we get the better engines. When we finish early rocketry, we will, at that point, be building new S-class rockets. I need to build an S-class that has better engines so that we can do some research with our sounding rockets that requires lofting 75 units of payload, which we currently can't do. So Space Center management goes away. That's the first rocket I wanted to design in this recording. And now we're going to warp until we've got our early rocketry. And now we can build the S5 rocket. S5 is just like S4, with the exception is that it will have enough sounding rocket payload for the contracts we've got coming up. And the trick I'm going to do, show you here, I'll put S4, save it immediately as S5. Fix the comment to say 75 liters of payload. Now, what are we going to change here? Well, we have this big nose cone, which is our avionics, and then this cylinder, which is 35 units of SO. I'm going to swap those. So, first of all, our avionics is just going to be a cylinder. Procedural parts. I'm going to run this back to cylinder here. And its diameter needs to match. This is going to be much smaller. Let's just do it this way. So, it needs to be 0.38. On top of that, we need this tank, which is our sounding rocket payload. Procedural. Now this one is going to be the smoothed cone. Make the top all the way down to 0, put the bottom back down 0.38. And it's be whatever size gets us all of the SO that we need. Before I start messing with it though, make sure it's HP aluminum fuselage. Make our utilization maximized, and now we can tweak the length of the cone until we have 75 liters of SO. Let's do a little math. So instead of 1.4, we want 75 divided by 76.794. 1.3672. 0.37. 1.367 would be a little shy. 6.8 gets us as close as we can get. I like having these just be the exact size. We could make them a little larger and then run back the utilization so that we only have the appropriate amount of SO. The benefit there would be we could fly it again later with a slightly larger SO. But if we're flying it at 75, the chances are that we'd have a mission that needed 85 instead of 75. Pretty low. So I will just tune that to 75. And yeah, let's paint this. So I've got the pattern I like. Let's make the whites nice and white. Am I painting tank? You. You're coloring gooey. There we go. White paint. It's the black metallic. There we go. So now we have 75 liters of payload in the nose cone, followed by a much smaller avionics tank. Now let's make sure that the avionics has enough power for us. And indeed, that got changed. I'm going to put in for 50 kilojoules, see if I can get there. Yes, we can do 50 kilojoules. And this is using the post-war avionics in the science core configuration. So this doesn't give us attitude control. It just holds on to our experiments. And as we have continually moved forward in our upgrades by moving from rocket to rocket, we should have the same science on this. Check it. Yep. Telemetry, pressure, and temperature. Got it. So that's S5. Except we're not done yet. The reason why I wanted an S5 wasn't just for that payload. I also need to upgrade the engine. It is an XASR1. We need to switch it over to an AJ10, which has more thrust. Yeah, oops, I forgot to note this is runtime 52 seconds. So we want to go 57 seconds worth of fuel. And real fuels, we remove all tanks, fill with the appropriate fuel. And notice that this is 28.74 seconds. We're going to start running this guy up. So 57 seconds. Nice, long, thin rocket. And what I noticed down here is once we get that thing all fueled up, its mass is now 1.1 tons. So when we modify our launch complex to build this rocket, it may no longer be able to build S1 through S4 because they're going to be too small. So this is a big step. Also, I've got the wrong launch complex set up. LCS, there we go. So this also tells us not only is our mass too high, but we're too long. We've got a height of 9.4 meters. The old launch complex could only handle 8 meters. So we need to modify the launch complex for this guy. Easy enough. Let's take care of this. We hit modify. It does come up here. It's pre-filled in the numbers. Maximum tonnage is 2. And notice that we're keeping the length and width the same. We're not going to crunch those down, even though we're not going to be doing sounding rocket over at an angle anymore. I don't think bringing this down is going to buy us anything. Oh, it does. It does. So this rocket's 1.1 by 1.3. I could bring these down to 3 meters and 3 meters. Maybe make that 12 meters so we can grow a little bit longer. Yeah, that's good. Now this does mean we can get 17 launch engineers out. If I go back to 10, oh, it's cheaper to. Oh, changing the length is what makes it more expensive to build. Go 3 by 3 by 15. We will be hiring more engineers when we have the money to do so we can pop these guys out faster. 23% commonality. So yeah, changing, doubling the mass and changing all the sizes. Modify. So this is going to take a bit. 18 days. So let's wait for the 18 days to go by. Save and continue. Almost forgot to save the new S5. So the question is, do I have enough money to hire the 7 additional engineers for LCS? Possibly not. That cost us some money doing what we just did. So over the next month, we are going to be accumulating some funds, so I can hire some of these guys. I can hire 4 of them. So with 4 of them hired, I'm not going to warp until D5 is ready to go, and we'll see if we can hire another one here. Can. More. So at 16, we could hire 1 guy more here. Let's roll D5 out. And it didn't take long enough for us to get any more funds, so no more fun jockeying. So it is now time to fly our D5. As usual, put a hard save in A, 1952, 12, 20 at 1958, 19. This is D-5-1 launch. Let's take a look at it. This is the real launch of our first launch of the D5 configuration. And we still have our contract active. I haven't messed that up yet, have I? Last chance to check. So, contract we're doing is the downrange distance launch vehicle development. Difficult. 240 kilometers downrange with 500 units of sounding payload. We have green check marks on new vessel, built at VAB, uncrewed with 500 units on the craft. So the things we need to do during this flight are maintain control for 50 seconds, get an altitude of 140 kilometers, and go 240 kilometers downrange. Not a problem. And I'm going to monitor the signs as we go. Control program for this is the same as D4. I believe we went over it before. There is a small change, which I will show you right now, because it makes a difference. The curve that I chose was this square root based thing where we're vertical at the ground and horizontal at some altitude. I've lowered the altitude to 140 kilometers. So in theory, if we powered all the way up, we would be thrusting horizontally at 140 kilometers. The reason I did that is our previous runs were at 240. We ended up with these rockets that went way too tall. As we added more thrust, that curve meant we were going taller and taller and taller. So I was able to decrease the cap on it so that now we're getting more downrange. And that caused us to have quite a bit of extra margin. All of this is the same. We're printing out our Karman line stuff. We're doing the steer gradually. We've got everything set up on when then. So it's all asynchronous here, which is, it's a problem if you do it a lot, but for just little things like this, just keep track of it. Just keep track of it. You know, don't let it go wild. And you turn off source code editor. And let's launch this puppy. Oh, it will be printing out something quick for us. I was curious as to what our pitch was on our flight path angle. So what angle are we ascending at as we cross the Karman line at 100 kilometers, and then again as we leave the atmosphere at 140? 45 degrees is the angle at which the ballistic trajectory gets its maximum distance before coming down across that same angle. So you want to cross into space at 45 degrees if you want to get as far downrange in space as possible. Now, there's, curvature of the Earth and all that. So that's not exactly accurate. That would be accurate if it was just a plane. I mean, if everything was just uniform gravitational field instead of spherically symmetric. But close enough. In any case, that angle will inform decisions later on, but we'll make a note of it now. And there we have main engine cutoff at about 50 kilometers or so, a little under 50 kilometers. And we're going to continue just kind of twisting in the wind a little bit. There's not much atmosphere up here, but there's enough to cause us to wobble back and forth a bit. Our aerodynamic center is still way behind the mass. So what air resistance there is will tend to make us point. But now that we've ejected it, this guy will tend to fall behind, and this little bullet shape is going to end up going butt first once we get into atmosphere again. So Kármán line, we were going up 33.7 degrees above the horizon, so a very shallow angle. I am not sure if we were on a trajectory that maximizes our downrange distance, but it should be enough. Let's watch our contract real quick. We're currently at 120 out of 240 kilometers, and we are still going up. So I think we've got this beat. Our apoapsis is over 180. That's way over what we need. So now it's the velvet of what science are we going to gather? We're currently running our biological and planetary scans. Those get good science. I mean, really good science. Oh, and we do have some contract completes from the prior runs that I hadn't done yet. It's the sound and rocket altitude and so on. We're just going to get those. Now, sometimes this will spin, tumble this way. I've had instances where it'll be rotating. Doesn't usually spin on an off-diagonal axis. It doesn't usually just kind of swirl around. Usually either a nice clean head over heels tumble or a nice clean rotation around its primary axis. So instead of just kind of hanging out here and mumbling a bit, I'm going to hit the time warp. I'm going to hit the atmosphere again. Descent is kind of boring, so I'm going to time warp as at times 4. And at some point here, there we go, close the pedals. And now I've got this bullet shape, which it's aerodynamically stable pointing that way. So the flat area tends to go into the wind because that's where all of our mass is. The rest of this is kind of open. The wobbling back and forth has shed a lot of velocity for us. And there's the parachute. Should be opening out soon. And the drogue chute will cut loose and be replaced by our trio. We're still running at X4 here. I am not sure why we always end up with these chutes chasing each other around in a circle here. Turn off our... It's a rough enough ride anyway without going to X4 time. And we can recover the vessel. There we go. And that completes a contract for us. That was a downrange distance launch vehicle development difficult contract. So we picked up a bunch of photography. We picked up a lot more science from the biological sample. So if we don't have any contracts to do with our downrange rockets, we're going to be repeating D5 just to get this stuff. I may adjust our ascent curve to put more time in space. We got some funds back from the parts we recovered, and we are ready to go. So I designed the S5 rocket, and we got everything going. It was all kind of hectic there when the other rocket came up. I didn't actually finish off getting it onto our build list. Let's take care of that now. I don't think we missed too many days. Anyway, money was tight, so who knows if we can actually afford this. Open up S5. So, LCS. S5 is good. Let's make sure we are tooled. We are not. We have 966 funds available. Good thing our tooling cost doesn't come out of 966, huh? However, this also means that it's a good chance we will not be able to schedule this for building yet. Plans. We're no longer going to be building S3 or S4. Add S5. We do need to unlock the upgrade to the Aerobee. This is going to cost us 191 funds to build. That was cheaper than I suspected. Okay, so we can get this going. So S5 is on our integration list. Now this is going to take 25 days. Question is, do I want to schedule another D5 for science? Knowing that our really... let's take a look at what contracts are available for. Looking for downrange contracts. 3,000 kilometers. We are not going to be able to hit that one with this rocket. Intermediate is now 240 kilometers. And difficult is 320. I think we can make difficult with a D5. I'm going to do a quick simulation and check. If we can, worthwhile. Oh, and low space film return. Above 200 kilometers and downrange 600 kilometers to return the camera. Hold on. D5, our testing hit 180 kilometers high. And I didn't write down how far downrange. I don't think we can do this quite yet. Not the low space film return. Low space biology is... Oh, this is a sounding rocket one. Okay, so yeah. Low space biological experimentation. This can be done with S5. First advanced. Can't do this until we've researched the advanced stuff. And we have 2 altitude ones. So we have 3 that we can do with S5. 1, 2, 3. We can't do this yet until we finish some research we haven't even started. Need a better rocket for this. Which means I could do an S5 that did this contract. Let's see if it works before I commit to it. And again, I'm going to pause during the simulation. Taking a long time to load here, Charlie. Okay, D5. I can't afford to actually build one of these yet, but let's simulate it and see what's going on. I'll be back in a moment. Okay, that actually flew with no problem. I don't think I can schedule one of these quite yet. Need to get a D5 onto the build schedule when we can. We may need to wait for some money. What if I try to schedule? Not enough funds to integrate. Okay, we're going to have to wait until we have some funds. So let's warp until this is reconditioning done. Actually, let's use something I haven't done here. Let's warp until fund target. Funding target is 1,500 funds. 5 days. Yep. And now I should be able to schedule a D5. The other thing I wanted to spend funds on was hiring one more worker in the S complex to speed up the S rockets. So let's again warp to a fund target of, say, 500. Staff. And we go back to CS. I'm going to hire one more. He is now full. There we go. We have 2 launches coming up. So the first launch is an S5 sounding rocket. Let's drop a hard save here. (1953) January 15th at 16:54:28. S-5-1 launch. The first low-space biological experimentation contract. Now let's double check that. 120 kilometers altitude. And I have every reason to believe we can do that. 75 units of sounding payload, then recover the sample. Now we go out and launch S5, now that we've got the contract. So yeah, somebody ran into the contracts office with the rocket on the launch pad, ready to launch. You could tell I've been away from Kerbal for a few days. Well, away from actually making progress in Kerbal. Let's see. So low space biological experimentation, we're all green. What we have left to do is reach 120 kilometer altitude and return home safely. And in case I print something out, I will have the console. I don't think the sounding rocket code is currently printing anything. Nice clean launch. Now earlier in the program, I had some problems with engines that were failing, or one way or another. They were going and doing low performance, or they were failing to keep running entirely. Glad we didn't hit that tonight. Okay, main engine cutoff, and our apoapsis is almost 200 kilometers. That is really good. Although I'm looking at my notes here and I failed to write down the delta V of this stack before we started. Separation. So I'm going to call this rocket good for 190 kilometer altitude. Which is great because the two altitude contracts we have available are at 130 and 180. Now, they don't actually require a soft landing, but we're just going to use this same rocket over and over again to get experience with it. Those are actually optional, so the only reason to do them would be if we're getting science, and I don't think we're getting much science. Oh, we're getting some science on the biological sample. That's good. Okay, taking a biological sample into space does get science points. It also costs us funds to build the rocket. It costs us salaries. Oh, payoff. Cost-benefit ratios, yada, yada. Still going strong at 170. So you notice that we're not actually transmitting any science because the experiment we're doing is taking a biological sample into space and returning it. So you don't get any science unless you soft land that sample. And 676, etc. Let's get the number here. 196,761 meters. Yep, I'll call that 190. And now I am going to time warp back the 10x until we hit atmosphere, then the 4x physical warp while we're inside atmosphere. Again, as with the previous ones, most of that cone is going to be mass, empty mass. So aerodynamically, the heavy bit wants to be down. Although with the sounding payload in the cone, that might not have been as true as before. Now we're just kind of bringing the payload home. Turn off the time warping so we stand a chance of actually recovering. Trouble recovery. If you're bobbing around too much, it won't let you recover. Okay. What do we have left? We've done our S5 launch. So we've got science covered. We've got 7 credits of science back from the biological sample we flew. We've got some funds back. And if we go to the demonstration building, we have now completed this first low space biological experimentation contract. Notice how early we are on this. So the rest of this time is going to be us getting this advanced biological suborbital experiment going. And the funding actually ramps up quite high here. So we chomped through this space program for suborbital research very quickly. So I'm not going to be too worried about just, marking time while more science happens, or sending up some satellites just to gather science. Out of curiosity, though, I am going to look at this. So early satellites, if you complete early rocket and suborbital research, which we're working on right now, and our objectives are send up some satellites. How about that? 4 years. Oh boy. That seems really fast. And that's early satellites light. Early satellites heavy. These are 100 kilogram, 400 kilogram. The light ones are any size. Okay, so this is firing up little teeny satellites, and this is firing up heavy satellites. 3 slots. We'll disable the following on accept. You accept the heavy, you can't accept the light. Accept the light, you can't do that. So let's choose one of those two. Early Earth observation satellites. We have to complete one of those two. So our next thing is going to be doing some satellites. We have to decide whether we want to do the light satellites, where we're going to be just any size, but this gives us an additional year. Oh, look at the funding here. 280,000 per year. Those are huge numbers. Wow. Okay, we're almost there. So we still need the advanced biological suborbital experiment here. And that's pretty much our sounding rockets done. The advanced biological suborbital experiment does require us having a speed, of 2,200 meters per second. I'm not sure whether that's ground speed or surface speed along your trajectory or orbital speed. But I think that means that the advanced biological suborbital experiment happens on a V2. So our sounding rocket work may be over. We'll have to check that out. The payload, right. The payload is advanced biology plus 200 liters. So yeah, okay, so this is going to be done with a downrange rocket. Early rocket development, we still have 3,000 and 5,000 kilometers to go. You've got 4 years left to work that out. We're good. Contracts. D5 is coming up, and we wanted to fly this one with D5. This is 500 units of payload, downrange 320 kilometers. We're going to accept that contract, so we're ready to go. I don't think I'm going to queue up an S5 rocket again. Unless you want the bio. I think. Sounding rocket gets us a few minutes of advance on our biological experiment, but so do our downrange rockets. Now let's just focus on the downrange rockets. We'll keep the S complex going for now, but I think we're going to focus on the downrange for a while. Okay, we are ready to launch D5. Not at night, we're not. What's going on here? Well, it got us to a sunrise. Make sure this should be D5 launch 1. Nope, D5 launch 2, sorry. Second launch of D5. So save game. 1953. We're actually doing a third launch in this recording. 0318 124234 D-5.2 launch. And our new tanks are coming up in 221 days. So after this launch, I'm going to break the video and go off and think about what we're going to be doing for the next 200 days. Probably not a lot. Maybe extra D5 launches to gain some more reputation, science, whatever. Hello, Mr. D5. In case you print something interesting, I know that you're going to tell me some angles. Look at the button. I did mess around with the next engine up on these V2 rockets. And if I just take this configuration, well, the D4 configuration, and pop the new engine bell on it and fully fuel it up, it ends up going all the way up to like 400, 500, 600 kilometers. And coming back down, it gets too hot. And we end up with our parachutes being burned away because they were the bottom thing on the stack. So at that point, that's an engine we want to use when we can put enough payload on it so that our apoapsis doesn't get too high. Or maybe, our it doesn't matter because we're not trying to soft land. So we should have main engine cutoff. Go. Between 45 and 50 kilometers. And we are just kind of lazily wobbling back and forth. It even looks like a model rocket to me. So jettison the empty tank. And certainly we should be opening the pedals. And then I'm going to start time warping. The contract says we're good. We just need to reach 140 kilometers and 320 kilometers downrange. We've got our Kármán line, 33.7 degrees as our flight path angle. I don't actually know, given that we're in an orbit, not above an infinite flat plane. I'm not sure what angle gets us the farthest downrange when we hit. 35 degrees flight path on base, and we here and we say 10x, and we're entering space. We hit our 320 kilometer downrange point before we entered space, entered the atmosphere again. So now we just need to get back. And in fact, for this contract, we don't need to soft land. I do want to soft land though, because we get some funds back. We have 3 contract completions pending. We've got the downrange development cult, blue space biology, and downrange difficult. Notice what these got us. Big chunks of confidence and all of that. First drug shoots out. I also like the fact that attaching these drogue chutes to the bottom means it pulls the bottom off to the side. We get the whole forward surface of the capsule just soaking up all of that aerodynamic pressure. And we cover. Okay, so science we got. We got some photography from flying over the Earth. We got our biological samples. Apparently our photography from space is already maxed out. That to give us some science coming back in. Mission summary, we got 747 funds from the parts that we recovered. Yay! So reconditioning D. We have our better tanks coming up in 219 days. We have our better engines coming up in another 90 days after that. Well, the better solid rocket engines. Not such a big thing anymore since we're, well, let's take a look at that. So the Aerojet 7800 is a fairly small SRB. It's like a third stage. I'm not sure what payload you'd put above it, though. And the Nike is a somewhat larger SRB. I've messed around with those a little bit. They're very nice. But again, if we're not doing any sounding rockets at this point, not that important to us. The big thing, though, is our early materials science. This gets us significant weight reductions in our fuel tanks. After that, we're looking at early science being the gating factor on our advanced biological capsule. As long as we get that out in time, because we only need to do 1 launch with this guy, we're good. I think we're well under progress 0%, ETA. Oh, this would be the ETA if we started now. That's not when we're actually getting it. Oh, it is. Okay, so we actually queued up some stuff heading towards satellites. We've already started research on some of the satellite science. Upcoming, we've got avionics prototypes, gets us improved avionics, lightens the avionics cone, increases its capabilities. So I'm going to go think about all of this and look at what we can do, what contracts we've got. We've got Let's see, downrange difficult. What is downrange difficult now? Do these change? Yes. Okay, every time you finish one of these, it shifts them over. So what was difficult is now intermediate. So now intermediate be 320, and the next launch goes to 410. So it keeps inching up your downrange distances on you. So you have to just do constant improvements in your hardware and software. Nice. Film return, we still have the problem of getting above 200 kilometers, going downrange 600. So yeah, that's going to be next set of technologies. We could do these. I mean, they get us some stars. What do I spend the stars on? What do I spend the stars on? I remember it's a currency. We haven't started hiring pilots yet. So hires cost us 5,000 funds. We could hire more researchers at this point. I think our budget starts increasing fairly soon. Yeah, we do have the funds. So before I call it a recording, I'm going to go hire 20 more researchers. No, I can't hire 20 more. I can hire 10 more. But if I keep doing that, just occasionally hiring more researchers, these numbers will come back in. And that'll help long term, not just for these programs, but for future programs with this agency. So over the next year, over the next year is not fair. In fact, any of these projections for monthly is going to be unfair because we haven't triggered any rebuilding of anything. Well, I think that's as much as I can do with this recording until I go do some planning and some prototyping. So I will see you in the next one. And until then, you go have some fun.